over to you, Christina.
Good morning. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along on this very early Wednesday morning, battling traffic wherever you've come from. I hope you're enjoying your breakfasts. I'm a little bit hungry, so we'll try and make this as entertaining as possible. So as Chris has said, I'm Christina Kilner from AIA. I'm the Head of Regulatory Affairs, so do some of all those things you just mentioned, which sounded great. I will let our panellists introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, David.
Hi everyone, I'm David Bricklebank. I'm the General Counsel and Company Secretary for ANZ New Zealand.
Thanks, David. I'm Jackie Wadhams. I'm the General Counsel and Company Secretary at AIA New Zealand. So I've been at AIA for about 5.5 years now, originally as the Head of Legal, and took up my new role in May. So I'm still getting used to that. And yeah, looking forward to today's session. So thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Jeff Ward-Marshall, General Counsel at SmartShares, which is a NZX Group company. I've been in that role since April. And before that, I had 3 years as Global Head of Regulatory at Xero, looking after their regulatory footprint around the world. And before that, far too long in private practice. Apologies to you.
Great. Probably just to reiterate Chris's comment, if anybody's got any questions, please raise your hand. It's a relatively intimate group this morning, so rather than have us talk at you for the next hour, it'd be great for people to engage in the conversation. Just raise your hands. Or I think there is an app.
There is an app. You can put questions in. When there's a couple of hundred people in the great room, you might want to put it through the app. But for this size, yeah, we're happy to take them.
So we've got a good cross-section of the financial services industry. Obviously, we've got banking, funds management and insurance, but probably one of the things we've all got in common is our avid interest watching the Australian Royal Commission back in 2018, 2019 and the ensuing... Oh, I want to let that poor person in. Let's all pause. Oh, good morning. Sorry. It's all right. Come on in. So we all watched the conduct and culture reviews unfold. So I guess the first question for everybody in this panel is how has the conduct and culture reviews impacted your businesses and what have been some of the biggest changes you've seen as a result? So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. For us, the banking industry took the conduct and culture reviews pretty seriously. I remember watching the Australian Royal Commission unfold in my office, and a couple of days later we got the regulators sort of knocking on our doors asking us if we had any problems. And I think the first letter we had to deliver something in about 3 or 4 days, so a few writers delivering on that. And I think one of the things that our staff were really keen to show is that we do have customers at the front of our minds, and there was a lot of passion in our responses. So I held the pen on, and my team held the pen on the documents that went through the regulators, and it was kind of like dealing with a fire hydrant in a way in terms of all the responses that were coming in from all of our staff around what we were doing to ensure the customer outcomes. So I thought that was really, really great. And then flowing on from that, we created this massive sort of room where we sort of brainstormed around how we could enhance good customer outcomes across the bank as well. And that sort of manifested itself into 10 pages, effectively, of dashboard reporting, which we share with our exec committee and our board conduct and culture committee, which is something that we've stood up for a while now. I think also we've rolled out a whole bunch of sort of data analytics around the customer outcomes. We've brought in a customer communication automation tool, which looks at some of the things that our customers are doing in a non-creepy way and sort of indicates to them that you can be avoiding fees if you do X. You should be in this product. You think this is a better product for you, etc. So, and there are many more examples of that come through that have come through over the past couple of years as well. So, overall, I think we've done pretty well in the last 3 or 4 years, and actually just up pretty well for COVID.
I can get it from that side. Yeah, I think just like you, David, I think our business were really passionate about the fact that we also had the customer at the forefront of our minds as well. So AIA's operating philosophy is, doing the right thing in the right way with the right people. And that operating philosophy is articulated in the New Zealand Conduct Framework that we rolled out to our business in 2019. So, yeah, I think that focus on customer outcomes really aligns to AIA's, vision to help make New Zealand one of the healthiest and best protected nations in the world. So yeah, I think there were things that we were doing that really put the customer at the centre of what we did as well. One of those initiatives being AIA Vitality, which is our health and wellness program. And that really gave us an opportunity to engage more regularly with our customers. So insurance being a long-term product, the opportunity to engage with our customers outside of the claims process is pretty limited. So in that respect, AIA Vitality has kind of been a game changer for us in terms of being able to engage with our customers more regularly and help them reach their health and wellness goals.
In terms of some of the outputs, I suppose, from conduct and culture, it's probably more geared towards Jackie and David having been part of the formal conduct and culture review. What sort of impacts have you seen on customer outcomes? How have they, what's been some positive outcomes for them as a result of the work that's been done?
Well, I touched on to the customer communication automation tool as one of them. I think we also have a lot of internal sessions, and particularly in this environment at the moment. What we see is coming as a tough economic environment. We have what's called an Impact KDF, Impact Key Decision Making Forum, which has our customers across the bank at the centre of what everything we do. So we're just, again, monitoring data to see if there are signs of vulnerability, I guess, and harm that not necessarily that we're causing, but obviously that the environment could cause, and trying to get in front of that with some lead indicators, etc. And a subset of that is what's called our ANZ Assist program, which is focusing on our personal customers, again, looking for indicators of vulnerability, of stress, and trying to get in front of that. So a lot of it is around data analytics, because we've got 2 million customers, and we're just using that to basically see where the problem areas could be in front of.
Thanks. Yeah, I think at AIA, a couple of examples that I can think of where, we focused on improving things for our customers in relation to benefit passbacks. So basically making our legacy products in particular more like modern products. So, enhancing the benefits that customers can access. Another example would be improving our technology platform. So basically making it easier for our customers to do business with us, not just our customers, but also our advisors. So we're heavily reliant on our advisor network in terms of, sales and ongoing customer servicing as well. So enhancing those technology platforms and making it easier for people to self-serve for our customers and for our advisors to serve and our customers too.
Brilliant. Jeff, let's give you a question.
Yeah.
Not being formally part of the conduct and culture review, what have you seen in terms of knock-on impacts and in terms of what you've needed to do?
Well, yeah, you're right. Obviously, fund managers aren't caught by Kofi, but we have been in the FMCA world of having a statutory duty to act in the best interests of our customers since 2015, 2016. We've obviously got the fair dealing requirements in FMCA as well. So we've been in that world and have been subject to the FMA's current good conduct guide from 2017, which in the context of the Royal Commission and Kofi coming in, looks fairly light touch. It's a series of questions that you self-assess yourself against, and it's up to you about whether or not you meet the requirements. So obviously very interested in what's been going on with the banks and insurance companies from a conduct perspective. I don't think there will have been a board at a fund manager in New Zealand that won't have been nervously watching those proceedings and making demands on their management to make sure that the ship's in order and everything's right from a customer perspective. I think the way we've approached it so far is very much set, tone from the top, get your values right, make sure that it's having the customer as a priority is pervasive throughout the whole organisation, but very much looking forward to the future, looking about what that new conduct guide will mean for us, because it will cover all three supervised entities.
So what would you expect to see, or what would you like to see in the new conduct guide?
At one end, there's a part of me that would love the FMA just to cut and paste insurers and banks into the current guide, because we wouldn't have to change anything. But looking at overseas experience, I think I have a feeling it will become a bit more prescriptive. Looking at the UK's recent consumer duty they've brought in, UK is a principle-based approach to the way they conduct their business, brought in a new consumer duty which requires regulated entities to actively procure good customer outcomes, measured against 4 criteria. So I wonder with our new FMA CEO, whether there'll be a UK lens applied across that. The 4 outcomes that the new UK consumer duty looks at are products fit for purpose, customers getting good value for money and a fair deal, which brings in the recent value for money experience that we've been and are going through here in New Zealand. And it also focuses on customer communications and customer support throughout the life cycle of a product. So I wonder if there'll be a bit more prescription that comes in. If it is going to be more prescriptive, I'd love to see some examples across the three industries about how that works in practice.
Examples is a big one. I think I say that every time any guidance is issued or draft guidance is proposed. Please just give us examples.
Exactly.
Speaking of Kofi, I suppose it's probably top of mind for almost everybody in the room. What are your businesses doing to prepare for Kofi? Have you stood up projects? Who have you got to work on it? What's been happening?
Yeah, well, we've already started. Jackie, we're quite fortunate in a way to have a platform from a culture and conduct reviews. They are still ongoing. We've had 6 or 7 reports that we've had to give to the regulators, which are a lot of work, and there's work underneath that work. We've started. So we started basically 3-4 years ago, but now we've stood up a program, sort of not leaving our home until Sunday night, and we've got a steerco of execs set up. We've got a board conduct and culture committee which oversees it all. I'm the sponsor of the program. We've got a project manager, working group, etc., and we're really getting into it now. So I think it's important, as I said, to start early, and to the extent you can. Obviously, the regulator's busy. Engage with the regulator around certain issues that you're seeing that you want to flag with them. We've spotted a couple of issues in the licensing sort of program that we just want to flush out with them. In terms of sort of interplay between our prudential standards and conduct standards, trying to avoid duplication. I think with all we've learned in the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years, we can come to this a bit later, it's really important to sort of have a good practice around review projects. 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, they weren't sort of that much in vogue, but they very much are now, and having that good governance around it all is really, really critical, I think.
Yeah. Like David and the ANZ, we've also set up our a project dedicated to Kofi as well. So we're just starting to get into the gap analysis work. I think from our side, our exec team have been concerned about the amount of work that's involved. So trying to scope out the project in a way that's manageable as well has been important. So we've been working through and considering how we're going to do that. We also have taken the learnings from the FAP licensing project that we have recently been through as well. So taking the parts that worked well and leaving behind the parts that didn't work so well. But we likewise have. I'm the project sponsor for the Kofi project. We've got a project manager. And we've got representatives from across our business that are involved in that. And I think we've also been making the point that this is not a kind of standing start for us. We've been on this conduct and culture journey for a number of years now. So really just picking up the work that's already been done and running with that. But yeah, I think it's still going to be a challenge, but I think we're probably well set up to tackle that challenge.
Probably just to lead on from that a little bit, and I know you touched on some regulatory change projects, and there's certainly been a lot of them over the last 3-4 years. I can attest to that in terms of what I've lived through. But I guess my question would be around how is everybody prioritising all of these different projects? Resources are finite at the moment, right? We've got a tight labour market. We're now losing that sort of mid-level qualified professionals who are sort of doing their overseas or doing their OE. It might be a little bit delayed. So I guess how are you managing to keep everybody going, keep them motivated, because you finish one and you jump straight into the next one, or you might even have some going concurrently. I'll start with you again. Yeah.
Okay. It's all good. Right. So I think there's first two bits to that. So there's the prioritisation of projects, and we have an extraordinary amount of projects going on at a given time, and C4 hadn't done that well 5 years ago, and we realised that we needed to be coordinated. So we've set up a project management office, PMO. Thanks for abbreviations, and the head of the PMO sits on our executive. She sits right next to me these days, and then the whole team sits right next to me as well, which is good. So it's good about funding, etc. So the PMO establishes funding, they establish resourcing, they give you a project manager, they help set up the governance, the working groups, the comms, etc. And then from that, the governance groups think about what resourcing we need, whether or not it's a dedicated person, whether or not, someone like a retail lawyer is needed to help out, sort of it's off the side of their desk. And so the REG projects are part of that PMO office effectively. And we're also realising that perhaps we could be a bit more coordinated across the REG projects, as well as just the PMO subset within the PMO to deal solely with REG. And we're just sort of working through that at the moment. In terms of the culture side of it, obviously, it's important that we treat REG projects in a positive light. There is a lot of REG change fatigue. I'm sure you guys in this room will appreciate that. So it's really important that as leaders we stay positive and that it's a good thing for our customers, across all of these projects. And, I think, as I said before, our staff are really passionate about doing the right thing by our customers. So that's not too hard to sell, but I think just the sheer volume is an issue.
Yeah, I think the same is true for us as well, in terms of the sheer volume. So I was talking to our Chief Risk Officer yesterday who was saying to me, "Oh, you must be just about through all your consultations now." And I was like, well, we've got through quite a few, but they're still coming and there's still more on the horizon as well. So I'm not sure that we're ever going to be at the end of, that tunnel. But I think the other thing for us is about that ruthless prioritisation piece as well. So thinking through the regulatory change that's coming through and how that, furthers our strategic initiatives and our strategic objectives as well. So sometimes that means for us that the reg change is going to be, high impact on our business and therefore would make our own submissions. Sometimes the impact is lesser and we'd look to make our submission through the inputting through the FSC submission. So kind of thinking through those practicalities. I think also if you're looking at how we resource those projects as well. So when I talk about the right people, making sure that we've got the right internal support, but also external support too, and looking to see who's got the right knowledge and skill set to help us with those projects. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I think where in-house lawyers can add benefit to a regulatory change project is being that early warning system. So realising at a very early stage that there's a germ of a policy proposal sitting in somewhere in the bowels of government, and getting engaged with those policymakers early, so that you can have a chance of steering the new regulation that's coming in the right direction, so that it benefits both you and your customers. I think in-house lawyers also have a role to bring the various stakeholders together, getting the right crew on board, seeing where the impacts on the regulatory change will impact the organisation. And again, in terms of prioritisation, I completely agree with your comment just before. You can't submit on every consultation directly, otherwise you would spend your whole lifetime writing consultation submissions. So you need to prioritise them about where you care the most, what the impact is going to be on your business the most, and the impact on your customers. And I think if you can triage that appropriately, then you're going to get the buy-in at the top level. And like I said before, that this thing comes from top down. Not all regulation is bad. A lot of it brings opportunity as well. Harking back to my days at Xero, which may be relevant to the bankers here, looking at the consumer data right, which was a licensing regime, but it was also a ticket to the game, and good for selling to customers. So, yeah, regulation has a bright side as well and brings opportunities.
No, I agree. It's always good to find a positive or a way to effectively sell the regulatory change to the business. I think the carrot works better than the stick most of the time. I just want to touch on probably, we've talked a little bit about conduct and culture and COFI, but actually we've been talking for quite a long time, so I wonder if anyone wants to ask a question now that they've got their bellies full of breakfast and are feeling a little bit more alive. Does anyone have any questions? Hi, Katrina.
Hi. Do you want to do mine or microphone?
If you have
I'll just do it. I'm sure. So obviously COFI has changed from when it went into the House initially, and now it's circulating and through SOT has changed significantly with third-party distribution. Have you changed how you read and how you apply that after it's now been passed in legislation, as opposed to how you started implementing some of that change earlier on into the beginning?
Let's take that one.
I won't go first.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. I don't think we haven't changed because we hadn't really started as such. We did a lot of work on the SOP and on the bill, and said some of that stuff is crazy. Really, what's being asked of here. So we're okay, I think, where things have ended up with intermediaries at the moment, and there's still a lot of work to go in there with that, and a massive amount of education with intermediaries as well in the context of COFI and the banks and insurers interplay with them and stuff like that. So the banks have been quite fortunate in a way, I guess, with CCCFA, in that we've got a very detailed piece of legislation that we've had to interact with our brokers on, and so that, and ANZ has actually done that. I'd say this, but we've actually done that pretty well. Our market share has grown since the CCCFA changes. So I think it's just it's just part of the game actually, and you've got to make sure that you do that they're a key sort of interface with your customers, and you just got to make sure you really nail it. So it will be a very, very important part of anyone's Kofi program as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, we obviously had conduct and Kofi in the back of our minds when we were doing our FAP licensing project. So we're hopeful that, you know, there won't need to be too many changes or too much impact on our advisors when, you know, with Kofi coming in. But we do have some concerns about the overlap between the two regimes, and trying to keep things as simple as possible for our advisor network. So yeah, that's something that we're keeping a close eye on.
I think there's been discussions with the FMA around, you know, in terms of your FAP license and gaining your FAP license and the assurance over that piece, whether that will be sufficient to demonstrate your compliance with the distribution arm of your Kofi conduct license. I haven't quite figured that out yet. I think that'll be a learn as you go type exercise, but there's certainly been some good indications, obviously, that, you know, there has to be some form of comfort that, you know, if you've obtained your FAP license and had audits and things like that and they've all gone well, then hopefully you're satisfying the distribution element of the Kofi regime as well. Good question, thank you. Anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I might ask David to elaborate a little bit more on the triple CFA. I don't know about you, but I watched all of that with keen interest. So it would be quite good to get a bit of intel from you, David, around, you know, what conversations you were having with the business when it came out, and while you were waiting for those reviews and reforms to work their way through.
Sure. There's actually not that many bankers here, I thought there would be. So, triple CFA is our consumer credit piece of legislation, and it's I was going to say it's a terrible piece of legislation. I'll dumb that down. It's not a great piece of legislation. You know, it's very prescriptive. There's a lot of harsh consequences. There's personal liability, uninsurable, unindemnifiable risk on senior managers and directors in certain circumstances, which, you know, that naturally drives conservatism. You just can't help that. And so the risk tolerance threshold sort of changes in that context. And, you know, an overlay of prescriptive law doesn't really help that, to be honest. So you get all that coming together, and it was almost inevitable that stuff was going to happen that came through in January and February. And you know, we did say that to the MD and others at the time that this was going to happen. So we felt a bit frustrated that we weren't listened to be honest. And even though some of the changes have helped, I don't think they've gone far enough. And we've said that to the government, we've said that to MD, and the NZBA have said that as well. So, you know, it's slightly disappointing, but at least they've sort of come back on some of it as well. And in the context of a lawyer, Inhouse lawyer, you know, giving triple CFA advice is tough, right? You've got the same rules apply whether or not you're lending out $100 or $1 million, or if it's, you know, a first-time customer, or if it's someone in your private bank. So it's hard, but I think our role as an in-house counsel is to enable commercial decision making, right? So banks are in the job of taking on risk, and you know, not everything can be gold plated. So there has to be a balance of sort of risk of commercial decision making in the context of that risk. And as I said before, I think we achieved that in the context of the triple CFA because we managed to increase our market share, which isn't easy for a bank that already has sort of 30% market share in the home loan space. So we've done it well, but I think in terms, and we can probably come to this a bit later as well, in terms of good customer outcomes and you know, these changes ultimately benefiting the customer, I'm not sure they've delivered on those in probably 95% of the circumstances that the consumer credit law applies.
Yeah.
Anyone got any follow-up questions? Oh, yes,
Yeah,
this one.
my name's Tracy Berry. I've got a question around triple CFA. I was talking to you for quite a while. Have you, sort of one of my observations is, obviously there's a class action underway at the moment.
That was one of my no-goes.
No, we're not going to talk about that. If you don't know the class action, you can definitely look it up. Do you think that that the premise of a class action though has changed the way that lenders are engaging with the Commerce Commission?
No, I think, so I don't know if you guys remember, we had a credit card repayment insurance issue, and one of the reasons why the FMA had a go at us for that was that we didn't disclose it as part of our conduct and culture review. And the reason for that is basically it wasn't in we hadn't got to one of our forums yet, but it's no excuse. And following that, we've just basically said, well, okay, and we're going to disclose pretty much everything to regulators going forward. And some regulators prefer that, some prefer a little bit more, a little bit less of disclosure, or more sort of more of a disclosure at a later date. So I think that's changed for us. We've certainly had more using the BEAR language, open and transparent relationship with our regulator because of conduct and culture, and probably because of that CCRI issue. And yeah, I think the class action, I don't think that will stop us disclosing issues to our regulator. I don't think that would be a good thing. I don't think that would be a good thing for anyone, to be honest. They have that sort of mindset. What it does do, though, is it really sort of focuses the mind on making sure that you're going back to the previous stuff around governance processes, your REG projects being set up appropriately, having technology buy-in, all that kind of stuff, because our issue effectively was a coding error. So that has been a catalyst, and that class action and the actual underlying issue going back 3 or 4 years has been a catalyst for sort of quite a significant uplift in some of our programs of work as well, which every dark cloud has a silver lining.
Any other questions? Yes, Katrina.
No one else is going to So in terms of triple CFA, the next round of change is the next round of change is going to be aimed at regulation, not the legislation. So the big issue around the legislation is the liability on directors and senior managers.
Yeah.
Without that change coming through in the next round of change we're talking about, how much more do you think will loosen up with just the change in the regs? Will we get back to 2021 levels of?
You mean the next change that's coming through because of the COFO work?
No, the next change is, they're doing 2 sets of reviews. They released the first one, which is changes through the regs around the edges. Yeah. And they're doing a second release, a second part of the review that's coming out at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But it's indicated that they're not going to be looking at any change in legislation only through the regulation.
Yeah. I think the change will be helpful. It's not going to be sort of moving is not the right word, but I think, and I've talked to some people on the Commerce Commission, or ex-people on the Commerce Commission as well, about this, that it probably needs a complete rewrite, or something radical needs to happen. And I don't think that will come through this, but I think it'll be an improvement on what's there at the moment. I'll come into a question that I think it's going to be asked. So when we have a home loan conversation, there are 5 bits of regulation that our staff have to consider, which is insane, right? And it doesn't really matter where that, what type of customer is. Again, it doesn't sort of look through that. And because of the advice changes, the advice reform, etc., staff are, and you guys know this with your staff as well, they're sort of scared is the wrong word, but they're very cautious and they don't want to make mistakes. So what we're seeing is we're seeing customers having what were relatively simple conversations, staff are kicking them out to sort of booked appointments, and those booked appointments take, are taking 50% longer than they were in the past. So you're having a 90-minute home loan conversation, and you can't have a conversation about home insurance or something because the customer's actually tapped out. They've had enough time. They've spent enough time on the home loan or any other conversations just that I've had up. And our number of conversations has gone up from 16,000, 18,000 to 23,000, and the market is actually quieter now than the 16,000. So I think we just need to all take a step back, and this is with the regulators, government, MD, etc., and say, well, that seems to be potentially driving an outcome that is not a good customer experience, not a good customer outcome. So what should we do to change that? And it's a credit to the government and a credit to MB that they have done that in the context of the CFA, but I think more and more of that will need to happen because that is going to be inevitable, that there will be those sore points just through the sheer amount of regulation. And we just got to take a step back and say, in the context of what the EPMA CEO says, we've got to focus on the outcomes. And, if we're not delivering on the outcomes, then, we need to change, I think, and change quickly. And hopefully, I think the regulators are on board with that, which is great. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
Perhaps we might venture away from Triple CFA for a little bit and give Jeff a chance to talk about things that are going on at SmartShares, and presumably, probably a hot topic for you is the climate-related disclosures, and presumably there will be others in the audience who will also be caught by that regime. I know AIA is. So what is SmartShares doing to prepare, and what are some of the hurdles and challenges you're seeing in that?
Thanks. And without wanting to drag it back to Triple CFA, if instead of borrowing money you were to invest in a fancy exchange-traded fund, that would be a great idea. Climate change, I guess SmartShares, we're all impacted by climate change, but from a regulatory perspective, SmartShares has got two strands underway with that. We've got the Integrated Financial Products report that came out of the FMA, which, again, coming back to conduct and culture, is focused on customer disclosures and making sure that in our world, investors have all the information they need to make an informed decision about the climate-related impacts of the whether or not investing in an ESG fund is actually investing in an ESG fund, making sure that the product actually does what it says on the tin and is fit for purpose. So we have a project underway, like many of you will have been through, to go through again our disclosures and make sure that that they are accurate, that they are digestible and understandable. And I think, like everyone here, one of the issues with that is that there's no set taxonomy for what is an SRI fund or what is an ESG fund. So there's I won't say fumbling around, but there's a lot of ongoing conversations about what words mean in our context and what they mean to our customers, and how we describe them. So there's that strand. But then there's also the Climate-Related Disclosures Act, and the work involved with that. XRB is currently consulting, I think it finishes at the end of this month, on the guidance for MIS managers. So SmartShares is caught by the regime as a large fund manager, but we're also caught within the wider NZX group, which NZX, obviously being a listed issuer, is caught at the group level as well. So we'll have work to do to support our parent in terms of making the group disclosures, but also work to do in terms of figuring out how across all of our schemes, which altogether I think comprise 250 funds, we carry out climate-related disclosures that actually have meaning to investors and have, again, coming back to the culture aspect, are disclosures that are digestible and actually inform their decision making. Yeah.
Might pass to Jackie now. Obviously, climate-related disclosures is a hot topic within AIA at the moment. I should know.
Yep.
And alongside that, I think the insurance sector in particular, and I think we've got a fairly big crowd of insurers here, and we've basically got a lot of moving parts at the moment. So we've got the FSLA and the FAP licensing regime. There's the COFI conduct licensing regime, which will come into effect next year. The IPSA review is almost getting there in terms of it's working its way through, but obviously with that we've got the changes to the solvency standard that are being brought in thanks to the IFRS 17. So there's just a lot of moving parts. So I guess probably for you is, what are the conversations that are happening at that management and board level, and how is everybody proposing to focus on climate-related disclosures, for example, as opposed to COFI, or how is that playing out?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of that prioritisation piece, our kind of number one focus at the moment is on IFRS 17 and getting ready for that. So we have a balance date of 31 December. So it means that we're kind of one of the first cabs off the rank there. So our finance team is super stretched at the moment in terms of, preparing for IFRS 17, and we're also part of the AIA group program as well. So trying to align to our group office time frames for readiness for that. At the same time, the finance team are engaged in the solvency standard review as well. And they're also engaged in stress testing. So we've been talking about and engaging with the RBNZ on, the resource stretch across that. But I guess we appreciate that with stress testing, for example, we'd prefer to do it now under IFRS 4 rather than wait and try and do that under IFRS 17. So I guess we're from a legal perspective, trying to help our finance colleagues out the best that we can to support them to do their work. And I guess the climate-related disclosures also touches our finance team as well.
Yes.
So just thinking about how we resource that, we're quite fortunate in that we have quite an advanced group program around ESG. So whilst the climate related disclosures is something that New Zealand's kind of going with first, and so we will be a bit ahead of the game there, we do have quite a lot of work that we can tap into from our Hong Kong office, which is good.
Cool. Come on in. Yeah, I guess probably a question I should ask all of you, given everything that we've talked about, is, what's keeping you up at night? What's sort of your biggest concern in amongst all of these different projects and regulatory engagement? Jeff, do you want to go first?
What keeps me up at night, aside from my children, would be just how we go about operationalising the new regulation that's coming in. There's a lot of, I look at, in the fund context, the value for money requirements. The FMA has started out by putting out an Excel spreadsheet that we needed to fill in for our 250 odd funds, which it's unmanageable and not scalable. We would, rather than spending our time responding to consultations, which nobody wants to do, we'd spend our time filling in a spreadsheet. So it would be great, operationalising that sort of thing. I also see coming down the track, in trying to imagine what these requirements will look like, but a new operational resilience and cybersecurity licensing requirement for fund managers. I wonder how, what impacts that will have on the governance aspects and scenario testing that might be involved with that. All that's yet to be seen. So I guess, from my perspective, it's operationalising it. It would be lovely if we could, going back to the value for money piece, use the information that's on the disclosed register and to automate a little bit of the value for money assessment allow for that value for money assessment to be right sized so that it actually has some benefit to the end consumer. So again, disclosures can be made and informed decisions.
Jackie?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's really about resourcing. So if we can get our resourcing right, then that means that I can focus on the strategic elements and, lobbying with the regulator, with the FMA and with the RBNZ, keep our board across what's coming, what's across the horizon. And likewise for you, Christina, to be able to focus on those kind of strategic things as well. So when I talk about resourcing, I don't just mean our internal team, but also, the external support that we've got there as well. So I think if you can get the resourcing part right, then you can focus on the things that you need to focus on.
Yeah, much like Jackie, I think people, from a workload perspective, I think it's come off a little bit, but it might ramp up again. We had a lot of stressed out people the last couple of years. And people from a risk perspective as well, I think you talked about senior manager regime and, the fact that errors sort of kite away down the bank can cause personal exposure, which I think is somewhat crazy. And you're seeing a lot of good governance people, to be honest, not interested in being on financial services boards, and I think that's a real shame. I've heard that from a few people actually, so that's something we just got to keep an eye on, I think. Touched on disclosure and the disclose register, I think, and no one's nailed this yet, but I do think the way we think about disclosure needs to change. Do people still read all these documents? I just don't think they do. Is the disclose register really working as people thought it would? I don't think people even go into it, other than perhaps industry participants. So I think just thinking about that long term would be beneficial as well.
Just pausing for questions. If anyone's got any questions or observations? Probably one of the last things to touch on, just conscious of time, I think it'd be a bit of an elephant in the room if we didn't talk about the increasing levels of regulatory engagement that I think we've all enjoyed over the last 3 to 4 years. And we've all seen the press releases and the speeches outlining the upskilling and resourcing regarding supervision and enforcement, and I think we've all felt the effects of it too. So I guess putting it to each of the panellists, how has this uplift in engagement and I don't want to say more readiness to enforce, because I think the FMA and RBNZ would maintain they've been doing that all along. But has that impacted your approach in terms of how you engage with the regulators, even on a day-to-day basis, if not on a more formal basis? So, Jackie, do you want to start, seeing as you're holding the mic?
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that the increased levels of enforcement, and particularly the enforcement that has happened to us, has been a challenge, and there's kind of no shying away from that. I think personally, though, it's good to have a strong regulator. But it's all about balance, right? So I think in terms of the way that we engage with the regulator, we also try and have an open and transparent relationship with them, where as soon as issues come to light, then we look to engage and tell the regulators about that. The other thing that we've been doing is inviting the regulators in. So just last week, the FMA were at our board meeting, and we had the RBNZ at our board meeting earlier in the year as well. So I think it's important that, the board hear what the regulators are thinking about. So it was good for, opportunity for Samantha to talk about their priorities for the coming year, and for our board to ask them some questions about that, and set the expectations. So, yeah, I think, like I said, it's not without challenge, but I think it's just made us be more open and keep those communication lines open.
Yeah. I can't see if there are any regulators in the room, so I'm just going to say that we absolutely love our relationship with the FMA. But I think anecdotally, I hear from other people in finance management firms that there is increased enforcement, and that there's a general fear that no matter how hard you try to do the right thing, you will get hit because you did the wrong thing. That's not been my experience with the FMA. They've been incredibly helpful. I think of things like we participate in the Asia Regions Funds Passport, and the FMA has been incredibly helpful about opening doors with that, with overseas regulators, and just encouraging it. So there are areas where both market participants and regulators can work together to succeed. We have regular stakeholder meetings with the FMA, which is a very open, free and frank discussion. We tell them what we're up to, and they give their feedback. They tell us what's on the radar for them so that we can get prepared. In the funds management world, we also have a two-layered supervision system. So the FMA has outsourced some of its frontline supervision to supervisors, your public trusts, your trustees, executives, your guardian trusts. We also have regular stakeholder meetings with them, and they also attend our governance meetings. They're coming to our board meeting in November. I think I'd be slightly more nervous if the FMA was coming, but public trusts certainly have a role in pretty much everything we do. They are the trustee of all of our schemes. They supervise our conduct. And like us, they have a role to make sure our customers' interests are at the forefront of everyone's mind. So yeah, I guess our other engagement with regulators is through the likes of the FSC, where the experience is great, and using all those advocacy arms to get our industry point of view across.
Yeah, I mean I think the conduct and culture reviews have sort of created a good relationship, or enhance the relationship we've had with our regulators, FMA, ComCom and RBNZ in particular. So much like these guys, we have regular meetings, board meetings, etc. I think that's been helpful for both sides. They get an appreciation of, some of the intricacies of banks and complexity of banks and funds management companies, insurance companies, etc. But that's not to say that they're not tough on us. We've had in that time proceedings issued against us by the ComCom, by the FMA. We've had 2 Section 95s via the RBNZ. But I think so I think the relationships actually work well in that context. And a point of the sort of proactive relationships, I guess, on both sides is that ideally we wouldn't meet, and I'm talking about both regulators and us, we don't want to meet at the bottom of the cliff, right? We want to have a discussion at the top of the cliff and try to avoid enforcement land. So I think that's in everyone's interests. And we go and talk to them about issues. I think if you're going to go talk to them about issues, probably best not to go say, "Oh, we've got this issue. What do you think?" or "Is this compliant?" Because they hate that, and you just got to walk through with them what you're thinking, what your plan is, and they're not going to give you a green light. They're going to sort of engage with you, and if they think it's appropriate, they might not even say it, but they'll probably let you get on with it. So I think it's the relationship has improved, but they've still got a role to play, and that includes enforcement.
I agree that the point about notification, the timing of your notification is quite crucial. Too early and your numbers might start to shift, and too late it might look like you've sort of dilly-dallied a little bit before telling them what's going on. So it needs to be swift, and you also need to have a clear plan and a reasonable ring fence around what the issue is and who's been impacted. So we have some time for questions. Any more questions or any observations? Otherwise I might pick on people. Don't make eye contact. Yes?
Smart shares, so it's a bit of a patsy question maybe. But look, how is the role of the in-house counsel changing? I mean, I sort of see that there's a lot of product work coming into it, product compliance and product design even, how is that different to maybe what it was and where's it going in the future in terms of the line between product and vehicle?
Do you have a pre-prepared answer?
Thanks, Hugh. I know you came in late. I'm Jeff from SmartShares. I think the role of the in-house lawyer, I mean, there's the kind of historic view that it's the Department of No, but I think that can't be the way. It's got to be the Department of yes, you can do that, but this is a way you can do it. So in terms of product, I think there's a clear role for an in-house function to help with the structuring of that. There's obviously products have a legal structure that sit behind them, but there's also different ways to skin that cat and design things, and that's where I think a good fund management legal team can assist. There's also having an overlay of what the regulator would expect from product, which helps with all aspects of product, from its design to the way that we sell it, to the way that we bring it to an end. The full life cycle has a legal overlay to it. We're very important.
Yeah, I actually forgot. I was going to talk to this one. I forgot to. So good question. So we at ANZ Group I had an offsite over in Melbourne, and our group general counsel got some of our execs over in Australia and New Zealand to do a little video on the role of an in-house lawyer in their minds. And I think it's evolved a bit, obviously, and they've had the Royal Commission over there as well. So there was, again, a lot of risk aversion and sort of a lot of consulting with the lawyers about stuff. And that created a reluctance to make decisions, right? And a gold plating of processes, and treating what legal said as gospel in a way. I can't do that because the lawyer said this, or the lawyers told me that. And a lot of that was actually probably miscommunication between the business and the legal team, or an inappropriate setting of the risk appetite. And so there's a change, I guess, of mindset, or we're trying to drive a change of mindset in the bank around, I've talked about this, enabling commercial decisions, right? We are not the decision maker. The business is the decision maker. And so our job is to advise the business to, to communicate all the risks that we can see, and to enable them to make that decision. And I think that's been helpful for our team and for the business as well, and for the risk guys, etc. And all of that obviously has to have in the context of what we talked about, a customer focus as well, and a focus on good customer outcomes, etc. So I think that sort of paradigm template or whatever has been helpful in the last sort of 3, 4, 5 months as we try and sort of face into all this regulation.
Maybe I'll just add quickly. I think also the in-house legal team has a role to play as a connector across the business as well. So because we, look after the board and sit on the executive team and manage that relationship with the regulators, and tuned into what the different business units are doing, that role as a connector, I think, is really important as well.
Good question. Are we out of time?
I'm sure we're squeezing one more.
One more. Yeah, the gentleman in the front.
Hi, Graham Holland from Apex Advice. You mentioned before about unidentifiable, uninsurable liability for executives. Do you think it's leading to negative customer outcomes better from a product or service perspective, or is it just driving cost to your in-house processes?
You were late, Craig, so you missed my answer to this question. Well, yeah, the CCCVA is a great example. So that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets reported up to our board and senior managers, and that hadn't been in the past, and a conservatism that drives. I think the whole point of that regime was to, and I might be wrong here, but I think the whole point of that regime was to stop truck shops and, you know, those guys, and sort of entered the Phoenix company, sort of rising out of the ashes to keep on selling sort of bad debt in lower socioeconomic areas, not to expose bank boards to personal uninsurable and unindemnifiable risk, but that going back to the previous point, right, the outcome of all that has driven conservatism and what we saw in, this year. So we do need to, if we do see something that isn't working, we need to reset, and reset quickly would be my view.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to call us time there. A huge thank you to our panel, our guests, Jeff, Jackie, David, and of course the wonderful Christina, who's done a fabulous job facilitating today. Thank you all so much for coming along. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.